Well, Donald Trump's deadline for Iran has officially passed, but there was no apocalyptic bombing, let alone the destruction of Iranian civilization, as Trump had said. And instead, American President Donald Trump announced that he agreed to a 2-week ceasefire. It is reported that absolutely all sides of the conflict have agreed to this condition. The United States of America, Israel, and Iran are all now observing a ceasefire. And there is even information that Israel has agreed to a ceasefire in Lebanon as well, where it is fighting against the Hezbollah group. It is also worth noting that Pakistani diplomats contributed to this effort. Pakistan is now acting as the main mediator, and it was Pakistan that they managed to achieve that both the Americans and the Iranians agreed to this ceasefire. And as you can see, it's quite symbolic, literally in the last minutes before the deadline. It should be noted right away that the Americans, of course, raised the level of tension to the maximum because B-2 bombers were actually scrambled. KC-135 tankers also took to the air, and in fact it happened right at the moment the deadline ended. They would have reached the positions from which they could actually launch missiles at Iran. And in addition to that, the Israelis and Americans were bombing Iranian petrochemical facilities all day. So it's obvious that there was quite serious pressure, but Trump also made certain concessions. Let's discuss this topic together now. There are some important points to pay attention to here, because this is breaking news, but as they say, certain events led up to it. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start this episode, as usual, I kindly ask you to subscribe to this channel. Give it a like. Leave any comment you want under this episode. And friends, if at the end of the episode you find this episode objective, interesting, and important for you, you can support the work of this YouTube channel financially with your donation via the QR code on your screens or through the links in the description of this video. It explains how you can support this channel. I will be grateful for any support you provide. Well, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News, because updates come out there much faster than here on YouTube. So, the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, has just announced that he has reached an agreement with Iran for a 2-week ceasefire. A ceasefire less than 2 hours before the deadline he's set to destroy, as he claimed, an entire civilization. Trump stated that the ceasefire agreement was reached on the condition that Iran agrees to reopen the critically important Strait of Hormuz. And now I will quote Donald Trump. Based on conversations with the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shahbaz Sharif, and Field Marshal Asim Muhammad, Donald has a great affection for Munir. He has spoken warmly and positively about him for a long time. At the same time, Munir has rather close ties with the militants of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. That's why Pakistan is an excellent mediator here, because they have certain contacts with both the Americans and the Iranians and can really negotiate. I'll continue the quote. So I had a conversation during which they asked me to hold back the destructive actions planned for Iran tonight, and on the condition that the Islamic Republic of Iran agrees to the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. I agreed to suspend the bombings and attacks on Iran for 2 weeks. This will be a bilateral ceasefire. The reason for this is that we have already accomplished and exceeded all military objectives, and we are still far from reaching a final agreement about long-term peace with Iran and peace in the Middle East. We have received a 10-point proposal from Iran and consider it an acceptable basis for negotiations. Almost all contentious issues from the past have been agreed upon between the United States and Iran, but a 2-week period will allow the agreement to be finalized. On behalf of the United States of America as President and also as a representative of the countries of the Middle East, it is a great honor for me to see that this long-standing issue is nearing resolution. Well, let's not go too far. Let's stop right here and go through this 10-point peace plan from Iran. Trump says that it's great and he agrees with it. And that's very concerning because this plan assumes that the Americans are making very serious concessions. Iran really did propose a 10-point plan to the US to end the war, and Iran insisted that what is needed is not just a ceasefire, but a full and complete end to the war. And among these 10 points are a guarantee of Iran's security from attacks, an end to Israel's offensive against Lebanese Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the lifting of all sanctions, both American and international. Tehran, in turn, promises to open the Strait of Hormuz. In addition, it is proposed to introduce a fixed fee of $2 million for each vessel passing through the strait. According to the plan, the funds will be shared with Oman, which is located on the other side of the strait. Iran will use the money to restore infrastructure damaged during the military operation. In other words, they claim that this will be a kind of compensation for the war that Trump started on February 28. I should also note that on April 6, it was reported that Iran and the US received a plan to end hostilities, which also includes opening the Hormuz Strait. And according to sources, the framework agreement was prepared by Pakistan and handed over to both sides on Sunday night. The document proposes a two-stage approach, meaning an immediate ceasefire, which was achieved today for 2 weeks, followed by the signing of a comprehensive agreement. That means during these 2 weeks, the US and Iran must reach a peace agreement. In other words, this is Pakistan's own proposal. At the same time, it is reported that Israel has agreed to a temporary ceasefire. Israel is a participant in the 2-week truce, which President Donald Trump announced just an hour and a half before the deadline by which Iran was supposed to open the Hormuz Strait. Otherwise, it faced the threat of escalating military attacks on civilian infrastructure. This is a statement from a high-ranking White House official. Israel also agreed to suspend its bombing and to continue negotiations. And it's important here that Israel also agrees to a ceasefire with the Lebanese Hezbollah. And there is a certain background here that concerns the mediators of these negotiations. It was in Islamabad, Pakistan, where Pakistan's foreign minister Ishaq Dar was making late-night calls to stakeholders in the region, conducting diplomatic negotiations ahead of the deadline. Pakistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement regarding the phone conversations between Dar and the foreign ministers of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Morocco, which were dedicated to the developing regional situation. This indicates that almost all countries in the region were involved in achieving this 2-week ceasefire. It is very important that this is not just a bilateral ceasefire between the US and Iran, but also a guarantee that Iran will not attack its neighbors in the Persian Gulf. In the past 2 weeks, Pakistan has acted as a mediator between the US and Iran. And in one of his previous posts on the X platform, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif called for a 2-week ceasefire to, quote, give diplomacy a chance to achieve a final end to the war. In addition, he personally asked to extend the period by 2 weeks, suggesting that Iran fully open the Strait of Hormuz during this time, to show that they are also committed to reasonable negotiations. And here I want to draw your attention to the fact that in order to achieve even this 2-week ceasefire, both sides took certain risks and accepted a certain degree of escalation. For their part, the Iranians loudly declared that they were ready to attack the entire region, that they were ready to destroy all the infrastructure. In the monarchies of the Persian Gulf, they threatened to strike data centers, threatened to destroy all American businesses in the region, take down the internet, and so on. Moreover, at the very last moment, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps made a statement in which they said, and I quote, "We will deliver such a powerful blow to the infrastructure of the US and their allies in the Middle East that they will lose access to oil and gas for many years." For their part, the Americans also raised the level of escalation significantly, because it is known that the Americans sent B-2 bombers and KC-135 tankers into the air, which indicated that their air force was ready to carry out powerful bombing strikes against Iran. Moreover, their takeoff specifically indicated that they would reach their missile launch positions right at the moment when Trump's deadline expired. This was very serious pressure on the Iranian regime, and it is obvious that in Tehran they realized that yes, maybe it's worth reaching some kind of agreement now because Trump is determined to carry out strikes. On the other hand, let's not forget that on Tuesday the Americans still bombed Iran, although not on the scale that Trump had threatened, but nevertheless. because airstrikes were carried out on a petrochemical complex and an industrial facility in Iran, and as reported by the Fars news agency, the attack on the Amir Kabir petrochemical plant in the city of Mashhad led to a fire. Meanwhile, as a result of the attack on an industrial facility near the city of Arak, 2 people were injured, according to the MEHR news agency. Earlier, state media reported an attack on a major aluminum plant in Iraq, but then for some reason this information began to be denied. Nevertheless, in addition to this, the Americans heavily bombed Kark Island during the previous night. This is the very island through which 90% of Iran's oil exports pass. The Americans have now bombed it a second time, targeting and destroying the military infrastructure. Plus, in addition to this, Israel carried out strikes on railways and bridges in Iran during the previous day. So it's obvious that certain preliminary strikes were indeed carried out to make it clear to the regime in Tehran that both the Americans and the Israelis are very serious. Now it's very important during these 2 weeks to once again watch where both sides ultimately land. Because, let me repeat, if Trump says that he likes the Iranians' 10-point plan, it means that the war will end across the entire Middle East. That means Israel will have to stop its war against Hamas and against the Lebanese Hezbollah. The Yemeni Houthis will also stay where they are and no one will touch them. So this is not just the end of the war against Iran, but against all of its proxy forces. And it turns out that in the end they still remain active. Obviously, in the coming years, all these proxy forces will be greatly weakened. It's unlikely that they will pose any kind of serious threat. But nevertheless, the very foundation itself remains. Unfortunately. That's all the news for now. Well, as they say, you can safely go to bed. And in the coming days, don't be shaken by every piece of news. There's one more thing I want to add at the end. Let's finish this episode on a positive note after all. The thing is, the oil market reacted very strongly to the statement by the American president that a ceasefire would be declared for 2 weeks. Okay, but the Iranian government made a statement, I'm just now seeing it, and the Iranian government declared that the US has lost this war, suffering a crushing defeat. Iran rejected absolutely all the plans proposed by the enemy and put forward its own 10 points, which were passed to the American side through Pakistan. And next, I'll quote the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The American side, despite all the threats, surrendered to the will of the Iranian people. Iran will hold negotiations with the American side in Islamabad on Friday, April 11, under conditions of complete distrust toward the American side. Iran will allocate 2 weeks for these negotiations. Sorry, I'm just translating on the fly, so I might make mistakes. So it's obvious that the Iranians, yes, let's admit it, the Iranians have partially achieved their goal. And I can't say that they're coming out of this war as losers or super weakened, no. If they keep control over the Hormuz Strait, then they actually come out of this war ahead. Thanks to the duties they'll collect from ships, they'll make up for all their losses. Proxy forces remain, the Hormuz Strait is under their control, and Trump is really backing down. Has anyone heard him say anything now about the demands that were made before the war? Not so far. I'll leave it at that for now, friends. If you found this episode important, interesting, or timely, you can support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation, sponsorship, or subscription using the QR code on your screens, or use the links and payment details. In the description of this video, it says, support Alex CPG's channel. I will be grateful for any support you can give. Subscribe to the Telegram channel Peachy News. The link is also in the description of this video. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. That's also very important. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.